With Alfred Hitchcock, the subject of cinema this evening, what more natural place to start than the Chamber of Horrors at Madame Tussauds? The deeds of the people who inhabit this room, murderers and perverts, all of them, are the very bread and butter of his filmmaking. Mr. Hitchcock, when you were credit title designer back in the early 20s, did you realize, was it your ambition to become a man whose name would be associated with the macabre in films?
No, not at all. The gravitation to it wasn't credit titles, because in the days of silent films we had two kinds of titles: narrative titles and spoken titles. Prior to that, I had been a designer of advertisements, which of course combined the spoken word and the illustration, and that's what the titles were. They were words with a commentary in the form of an illustration. They were rather naive and sort of oversimplified, almost juvenile in a way, because if you had a title which said George was leading a very fast life by this time, the illustration would be a candle and a flame at each end.
It was your job, in fact, to add impact to the words with some kind of lettering style. Or...
That's right. Mm-hmm.
But then you became an assistant director and a scenario writer.
Yes, well, you see, in those days there weren't producers. There were directors and what was called a scenario department, a writing department. So you had a head of a department and the writers were under him, and so were the editors. So a film went out under his supervision, overall supervision. When it came back finished, he would edit it with an assistant. And that's how I was able to get acquainted with the writers and learn script writing, which I, absorbed quite an amount of that. And then, having been a draftsman originally, when the time came to do art direction, I used to do that as well. In fact, on the same picture for several years, I used to write the script and do the production design as well.
Now, according to legend, you became a director because the director who you'd been assisting would no longer work with you. Is that a fair way of describing the situation?
I don't think he'd no longer work with me. He didn't want me to work with him.
Why not?
That was the truth. I don't know. Politics.
Can I suggest to you, you were art director, and as such you obviously were thinking all the time of the shots that you expected to see taken on the set. Was it that in some ways you were breaking into his territory?
Oh, I not only broke into his territory, I gave him the shots and where they should be taken. I built the set in such a way you couldn't take it from any other angle. I remember once in the picture Woman to Woman, we had a big Park Lane house, and it was the entrance hall and the reception. Now, when they came into the set, there was this grand staircase going up with a balcony on each side, and back to us was the front door. But at the top of the stairs, there was no set at all, no wall, nothing. So I said, well, how can we shoot this? They were expecting to do the conventional shot of from the door, looking up the stairs, and the balcony, and the hostess at the top, and the people going up. And I said, no, you take the shot from the top of the stairs, looking down. They said, why that? I said, because the hostess is at the top of the stairs, and everybody coming in will be seen coming through the doors, up the stairs, and be greeted in the foreground. That way, I said, you will have the set in the background for the whole sequence.
And was that sort of suggestion?
I was 23 then.
And in fact, with no formal art training behind you, this was something...
Oh yes, I've been to art school, University of London.
I see.
But, just the smattering of art, just as I had a smattering of education in engineering, and that's where I learned draftsmanship and so forth. But I was, in a way, a small martinet. I said, this is where the shot is to be done, and the director was helpless.
By that time, you obviously had your mind very firmly set upon becoming a director. Did you expect to...
Not at all. It never occurred to me. Until the director said he didn't want me anymore, I was in a limbo for the moment until the producer said, how would you like to direct a picture? I said, it never occurred to me. I was very happy doing what I was doing.
Now, skipping the next two pictures, where you described them as assignment pictures, the first picture, which is definitely in the Hitchcock style, was The Lodger, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. That picture showed a strong German influence, which I had acquired by working at the Ufer Studios, Berlin, in their heyday. That was one of the finest studios existing in Europe at the time. Tremendous technical achievements they were doing, and they made Siegfried, you know, the Nibelung and Ring, Yannings. They were working on Yanning's Last Laugh when I was there.
Was it chance that your first film, this first important film, was about murder most foul and in quantity, or was that already the way you saw your career and your interest in films going?
I was interested in the macabre, but I think that was an English thing, you know. English writers and literateurs have always played a great interest in crime, much more than any other country, you know. One would always read when there was a cause célèbre at the Old Bailey, the seats would be filled by famous actors and writers and so forth. So I think that grew out of one's natural interest. Incidentally, when I had finished The Lodger, and it was seen by the distributors' representatives, they thought it was so bad that it shouldn't be shown.
This was because it was out of the present-day idiom of...
Oh, it was, and I understand that the director that I had been working for was looking at the rushes and reported to the producer. He said, I don't know what the devil he's shooting. I don't understand a word of it. And finally came an afternoon when the big shot was coming down to verify his menial's verdict on the picture. And I remember my wife and I walked out of the studio and went for 2 hours. We found ourselves at Tower Bridge. I said, well, it must be over by now. Let's go back. Hoping, of course, this is the most suspenseful moment I've ever had, to go back and find smiling faces. It's all right, he likes it. But not a bit of it. He confirmed it, and they put the film on the shelf. Stayed on the shelf for about 2 or 3 months. And they said, well, we have an investment in this. Better take a look at it again. And they finally agreed to show it. And then it was acquired as the greatest British film made to that period. So there you see the fine line between failure and success.
Was it in your mind during those 2 months on the shelf that this might be the beginning and end of a director's career? That you might
No, I didn't think of that. That never occurred to me at all. Never occurred to me.
I'd like to know if I made this choice of subject just a little, because it is so much the roots. Well, I've always thought of you as a man who, besides being a film director with his own absolutely individual style, as being a man with a very shrewd commercial flair. Did the murderous aspects of that film and subsequent ones have a commercial attraction for you as well?
No. The commercial attraction to me comes out of the fact that I'm a believer that film belongs to the masses. It was the newest art of the 20th century. And there's always that feeling that commercial or box office are dirty words. And it's nothing to do with it. It's to do with telling a story with the widest possible appeal, but still applying all the artistic techniques and manner of storytelling without degrading yourself at all to what is vulgarly called the commercial. I think it's axiomatic that if you take into consideration the elements that interest wide audiences, then you can tell your story as imaginatively as you like, as long as you make it clear to them.
Wouldn't you have dearly liked your Jack the Ripper of The Lodger to be proven at the end of the film, Jack the Ripper?
Of course. But you see, that's the penalty of having a film star in a story of that kind. he inevitably has to be cleared. Now, I had the same experience with Cary Grant in a film called Suspicion. It's a big disadvantage. On the other hand, if you have a chase story, it's an advantage to have a named star in that, because the audience anxieties are increased, because they know him well. He's a relative.
Yeah.
He's a relative in trouble.
But in your mind, David Othello definitely was the fiendish stabber.
Well, he had to behave like one, so the excuse was given that he was a nervous, almost a schizophrenic. He was a man who was a brother of one of the victims and really had gone off his head. But these are rather clumsy sort of excuses. Strictly speaking, you should not have a matinee idol in a role of that kind.
Mm-hmm. There was a rather famous sequence in that film where you used a sheet of glass for a floor, wasn't there? Would you like to tell us about that?
You see, that's the visual interpretation of the missing sound of those days. In other words, a man is pacing a room up and down today. We'd do it by sound, and you would see the chandelier shaking. Well, the substitute for that was a visual impression of the room above, and you saw the soles of his shoes and the full length of his body and the ceiling of the room beyond as he paced up and down. And I did it by having a floor made of 1-inch thick glass.
And perching the fellow on top. Your next film, The Ring, in fact, was not any furtherance of the crime theme, was it? It was a straightforward...
No, it was a boxing story, you know, from gypsy to middleweight champion or heavyweight champion or whatever it is.
Why the fascination with boxing? Was it the element of violence in that attracted you, or was it something?
No, it wasn't. I think it was the topicality of it at the time. I'd been to the Albert Hall and seen some of these fights. And I was always interested in fairgrounds, so we had the fairground and then we had the rise. And I remember I first started the 24 sheets showing the name of the box and then all the seasons passing through, the snow and the rain and the spring and the summer, and the name got higher and higher, which was practiced many years later by many people. They even did it in that Kramer film, The Champion, many, many years after.
This process of condensing a great deal of information into a short montage is something that you have used extensively, isn't it?
Well, it's information that must be given to an audience that doesn't warrant length or dramatic presentation.
Where did you get your early approaches to the cinema from? Did you go to the cinema a lot in those days?
Mm-hmm. In fact, about the age of 15, I didn't even read fan magazines. I only read trade papers, especially American ones.
So there were the Russian influences, the German influences, and the Americans, all, and of course, what British influence was, and it was all. I find it rather extraordinary that the Hitchcock purists say that the 9 or 10 years before the war were very important ones of yours in England, and they say it because it was in England, and yet the publicity you received in the newspapers those days said that you directed things in the American style.
Well, you have to remember that I was American trained. When I first went into the studio at Islington, this was a studio called Famous Players Lasky British Producers. And when you entered the doors of that studio, you could have been in Hollywood. Everyone was an American. The writers were American. The directors were American. In fact, I believe the first film I had written the script for and did the art direction, when it was reviewed by the Daily Express, the headline said, "Best American Film Made in England." Well, that was the influence of the oversized sets. You know, in those days, of course, everything was exaggerated. All the rooms were like cathedrals, and it belonged to the era just as much as the new cinemas growing up at that time was a haven, was a palace away from the sordid little homes that people lived in. And they walked into the lobby of the big motion picture palace with a carpet 6 inches thick, you know. And the whole atmosphere of film in the 20s was
you had
full
to
of that.
reproduce that glamour on the screen, in fact.
Very much so, yes.
Well, now we had a blackmail and a profound shock for almost everybody in the industry, I would have thought, including you, the advent of sound. Was it a shock for you?
No, it didn't bother me at all. I just took to it like I won't say a duck takes to the water, unless it was sound, we'll say as a duck takes to a quack. Nothing, it didn't bother me at all.
But as a director who'd been working purely on mute films, it must have been a sudden, extraordinary widening in technique demanded of you.
Sound, of course, there was sound. There was sound to be played around with. There was a counterpoint of sound. One had to realize there was a new element, and they shouldn't make the same statement. I've always believed, but unfortunately you can never get it written this way, that the voice should never make the same statement that the face is making. In other words, if a girl says, I'm happy, and she's got a happy expression, you're saying the same thing twice, once with sound and once with a visual. Should be counterpointed. You know, a girl can be crying, and in an argument she can say, well, don't make me laugh, with sarcasm. Now that's the true counterpoint of the words against the visual. But of course that isn't practiced at all, never even given a thought. But it's the essential thing, and I realized that at the beginning.
Well, once again, from reading about your quotes, I think your actors must have learnt your ideas about this rather painfully. I suppose the shortest and most pertinent quote of yours of actors is, actors are cattle.
Well, I've been accused of saying that, and I remember when I was given the Milestone Award by the producers of Hollywood a year ago, I did say in my speech that I had been accused of saying that actors are cattle. I said this was absolutely untrue. What I possibly said was that actors should be treated like cattle.
Why are you so demanding and such a martinet of actors? Once again, I've read quotes of yours saying that when Kim Novak in a film came on the set, you wanted nothing on her face except a single emotion at a time.
Well, my idea of a good actor is somebody who can do nothing well. I think there's a misquote there, and she wasn't able to do nothing well. The presence of an individual in the form of an actor on the stage or on the screen, if he strolls on and lights a cigarette and he looks interesting when he's doing it, that, to me, is an actor with control, nonchalance, saving himself for his dramatic moments. In other words, he has an idea, he doesn't explode all his gunpowder and ham it up or so forth. But the quote about them being cattle, I think, relates to their attitudes on the set, you know, that they know it all, and in a way they're children. I regard them as all as children. They're not very bright, some of them.
And you pull the strings?
No, I don't pull the strings. I say, well, here is the scene, you know, do it. Remember doing a picture with Doris Day, and she got into tears, and one lunchtime wanted to see me with her agent, and then she complained that she wasn't being directed. Well, I don't direct. I don't shout out on the set, do this and do that. I tell them quietly in the dressing room what the points are being made in this scene, the character points and the dramatic points, and that's it, and then it's up to them. But
supposing you're not getting what you want?
Well, then I take them aside and whisper something. See, I don't believe in behaving like a director, yelling and screaming. I have a phrase for that. I call that all the drama on the set and none on the screen.
Did the availability of sound create any casting problems halfway through Blackmail?
Well, the main problem concerned the fact that I had a Czech film star playing the part of an English girl. This, of course, was all right when Blackmail was a silent film, but the decision was made to change it into a talking film. So there the problem cropped up. How do we get around the problem of Miss Andra speaking with a heavy foreign accent? Now, in those days, we couldn't substitute voices with the ease with which we do today. So I had a young actress, Joan Barry, sitting on the side with her own microphone, while Miss Andra, on the set, playing her scene, just mouthed her words. So the girl on the side had to follow her very closely. And that was the most primitive and earliest form of what we call in our business of dubbing the voice on.
Since you couldn't add sound effects and things afterwards, the studio must, on occasion, have looked like an absolute nightmare. You had to include sounds at the same time, did you?
I had a scene in the following film after Blackmail, which was Juno and the Paycock, with the Irish players. And it was a close-up of the son, the guilty son, who had betrayed his friend. And the family had come into the room. They bought a phonograph, or they were playing a record, If You're Irish, Come Into the Parlor. And then there was a choir. They stopped the records. The dialogue indicates there's a funeral procession going by and singing these Catholic hymns. Well, now, this was only a close-up of this fellow. It was a creeping close-up. The camera went slowly in like that. Now, they couldn't find a record, If You're Irish, Come Into the Parlor, so in one corner of this tiny studio, we had an orchestra with no bass to get the tinny effect. The prop man sang the song by holding his nose to get, again, the thin voice. The rest of the characters played their dialogue. Then in another corner of the studio was a choir for singing in the procession. And there was more room taken up by the effects than there was by the camera and the individual being photographed.
You, the conductor, right in the middle.
All over, I was all over the place.
Now, moving on to 1930 and Murder, which you've described as your first important whodunit.
And only whodunit.
Ah.
I've never made a whodunit since. Very simple reason. The whodunit contains no emotion. The audience are wondering. They're not emoting. They're not apprehensive for anyone. Only if you have a girl who is probably innocent of the crime, and they're worried about her. But actually, the main concentration of their appreciation is who done it? Who did it? The butler or who else? When the film is finished and the revelation comes, well, you get 2 or 3 minutes of saying, ah, I told you so, or I thought so, or fancy that. I prefer to do the suspense film by giving all the information to the audience at the beginning of the picture or early on in the picture. Then they won't wonder. They'll be apprehensive for the individual.
So that was why Murder was your only. Of course, The Man Who Knew Too Much was fell into the second category.
Second category, anxiety for the mother of the kidnapped child.
Now, you once again in this there was some typical Hitchcock situations in that you were worrying the audience on the hero's behalf with the hero in very familiar situations like the Salvation Army Hall. Is that part of your philosophy?
Well, the basic thing is, in order to get an audience really going along, I've always, ever since 39 Steps, taken average man and put him in bizarre situations. Cary Grant in North by Northwest, Joel McRae in Foreign Correspondent. So the audience identification is so much the stronger. That's why in the adventure story, your film star is an advantage in that respect. They worry about him. And if he's lesser known, I think the degree of anxiety is reduced. If you walk along the street, and you see an accident, the figure lying there, you know, excites your sympathy, but you give a casual glance and go on. If you took a second glance and you find it's your brother, well, you start running in circles immediately. It's a different emotion, or far deeper emotion.
When you went to America, one of the things that you mourned that you'd had to leave behind in England, particularly shown in The Man Too Much, that Knew Too Much, was an illogicality. You had to become more logical later on, didn't you? You could take freedoms with the audience's consent in The Man Who Knew Too Much.
That's true, but the problem in America is that the audience, whatever degree of education they have, ask questions, and they ask quite offbeat questions. I have a phrase for it. Not that I want to deprecate the American audience, or the world audience for that matter, but the phrase I use is moronic logic.
And the English don't suffer from that complaint?
In some respects they do. It comes under the heading of questions that are asked of their parents by children, such as, why does thunder turn the milk sour? Nobody knows what the answer is.
Now, The Man Who Knew Too Much also included the Albert Hall sequence, and once again, these very famous locations crop up in your films. Do you have a particular reason for wanting to use places like that?
Oh, yes, I think they're topical. The audience know about them. But what is more important, when you choose a location, it must not be a background to me. The goings-on in that location must be involved in the story. For example, orchestration is used, choral voices are used emotionally because a child has been kidnapped. So the emotion is worked through the choral group. And the assassination, which is about to take place, and we all know it, everyone knows it, they even know that when the cymbals crash, that's the time for the shot to go off. Now, all the audience are given that information long ahead of the scene. Otherwise, all the cuts to the music and to the man holding the cymbals would be meaningless. But they become very potent when the audience have all this information. That is the true métier of suspense.
Now, your next film, I imagine, 1935, The 39 Steps, is one of your most fun.
Yes, well, there you get average man caught up in bizarre situation in a way that he cannot extricate himself from it. Now, here we come up against the, shall we say, a structural problem story-wise. When a man is chasing a spy and the spies are chasing him, the inevitable moronic logic is applied. They say, why doesn't he go to the police? Well, in order to prevent that, you get him involved or accused of a murder at the same time. So you answer those morons immediately by putting him in a position that he can't go to the police. Same applied to Cary Grant in North by Northwest. He's found with a hand holding a knife in an assassination in the United Nations. And immediately all eyes are on him, and he's on the run. He drops the knife and runs. Now, this happens because he's in friendly territory. Now, if he's in unfriendly territory, what we'll say behind the Iron Curtain, behind enemy lines, he can't go to the police.
So you're all right in any case?
So the background covers it. Now, of course, in Torn Curtain, I've done both. I've had my cake, and I eat it as well.
Cinema, roll 5, Alfred Hitchcock.
You talk about more on logic. The audience do have a right, of course, to question the motivations of your films, don't they?
I think they have every right, even to the degree where they have a right to ask for their money back.
We wouldn't encourage them to do so.
No, I don't think so.
You were saying that your hero in your new film, Torn Curtain, doesn't, in fact, have this problem with the police because he's against them in any case.
He's behind the Iron Curtain, so he's in danger already by being, how should we say, in an area where every hand could be turned against him. But we also have the killing as well, so we not only have him in enemy territory, but we have him accused of a murder at the same time. That's what I meant by having one's cake and eating it as well.
What do you remember about 1936 and The Secret Agent?
I remember a lot about it. That was Somerset Maugham's Ashenden. The film didn't succeed, although I had a lot of ideas in it. I think its lack of success was due to the fact that the hero, his objective was negative. In other words, he was sent to kill a man, given a killer to do it, it's true. But his attitude was reluctant. And therefore the audience had no rooting interest at all. They were confused. They couldn't say, well, don't do it, you're right not to do it. Because usually the pattern is for the hero is to achieve something, and the audience want him to achieve something. And I think that was the root problem in that story.
So this was a misjudgment on your part of audience psychology?
It's a thing that over the years you do learn from audiences. I don't care whether it's English audiences, American, Japanese, they're all the same. They all love to enjoy fear. They wallow in terror, and they always get off giggling, like off the Switchback Railway. So you learn never to explode bombs, or to save it at the last minute, and relieve the audience in the end, but give them all the apprehensions.
In Sabotage, in Sabotage, in fact, you did explode the bomb, which was once again...
Big mistake, because you've had this poor audience in agony for the safety of a small boy, and even telling them that a bomb will go off at 1 o'clock and then taking it to 3 minutes past 1, then blowing it up. I remember at the time I was at the press show, and one rather important critic almost rushed at me with raised fists for doing that to her, because she said she had a 5-year-old boy at the time. I think the boy is now a journalist in Fleet Street.
Did you at that time realize at that press show that you had made a mistake, or did it take a while for these
Took a while.
to sink in?
Took a while.
Now, the thing we remember about Young and Innocent is a very, very long, very, very slow track into a twitching eye.
Well, this is another variation of letting the audience in on something. In this situation, you have a young girl with a hobo, a tramp, you see, and he's the only man who could identify this murderer. And all they know is that he has St. Vitus dance in the eyes. And she manages to get him some good clothes, and they go into this large seaside hotel where there's a thé dansant being held. And they dance a bit, and then they sit at the table, and the old boy said, well, this is idiotic, in a big room like this, trying to find a man who has twitching eyes. And at that moment, I take the camera high up into the lobby of the hotel and do the longest dolly shot through the lobby, through the ballroom, through the dancers, through a minstrel black-faced band, right through the band to the drummer, to his head, and right to his eyes. And the moment the camera arrives there, they blink. And the moment you do that, you go back to the young couple.
So the audience now knows the young couple are still lost.
Now you said to the audience, you know where he is. How do you think these two are going to find him? And the rest of it was the processes by which they discovered him.
And then moving on to the last film, which is in our canvas today, The Lady Vanishes. And shortly after The Lady Vanished, Alfred Hitchcock did as well, to Hollywood.
Well, that was the next step, you know.
Why do you think that film was so successful, and why do you think it drew Hollywood's attention?
Lady Vanishes?
Yes. Because it was that film which bought you the firm offers from Hollywood that took you over there, wasn't it?
Oh, no, it wasn't. No, but as a matter of fact, I was in the middle of shooting Lady Vanishes when I got the offer to go to Stick, and that was to make a film on the Titanic.
Ah. Which you couldn't do, in fact.
No, which they switched to Rebecca. Oh, no, the offer came a long time before.
I believe The Lady Vanishes, you regard as a variation on the theme of an old chestnut story about an English lady in Paris in the 1880s.
Oh, that's the old legend. I mean, Alexander Woollcott has it in his book, While Rome Burns. It took place around the time of the Great Paris Exposition, about 1880 or something, when they built the Eiffel Tower. And a mother and daughter arrived in Paris from India. The mother was taken ill, and doctor examined her and so forth. They sent the daughter off to get some medicine. Of course, there was only horse vehicles in those days, so it took 4 hours for the girl to go across Paris and bring back this particular medicine. When she came to the desk and said, "How's my mother?" they said, "What mother?" They disowned the mother. She said, "Well, she's in room so-and-so." They show the girl the room, and it's differently wallpapered and so forth. And of course the whole secret was they were terrified that this woman who had died from bubonic plague, they would get around the city and ruin the exposition. That was the so-called story. Mrs. Belloc Lowndes wrote one. I can't remember the name of her story. It'd been written by several people, and this one by Ethelina White, The Wheel Spins, was the same idea.
But in a
different setting, yes, sure.
I believe, in fact, you have shot your own film, Done in Flames, there by saying, why didn't they send the message back by carrier pigeon?
Well,
which would have destroyed the entire plot.
I was a moron coming along with my logic, you see.
But getting away with it. Can you cut, Phil?
Yeah.
At what stage in the 30s did it become clear to you that your filmmaking activities were going to be towards the macabre, as they...
I think it started with A Man Who Knew Too Much and then developed right into 39 Steps.
And you realized then that that was going to be your métier?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Can you explain your own personal fascination for the macabre?
I think really it gives one an opportunity to express the violent in understatement. It's the melodrama, you see, that you play against. That's what I'm interested in.
But some would say that...
Sorry, old chap, but I have to kill you. I hope it doesn't hurt. You see.
But when the killings become rather bloody, as they sometimes do, that's almost overstatement, isn't it?
No, it's, I would say the killings become more realistic and less from the movies.
Changing subject abruptly, can I ask you, where Robert Donat in 39 Steps was handcuffed to a girl? There was a bedroom scene between them, if you remember. Mm-hmm. Was this the beginnings of sex interest cropping up in your films consciously or not?
Oh, I think that the handcuff and tying up is a highly sex symbol. If you'll notice, always newspapers photograph criminals being taken away in handcuffs. We used to read years ago of undergraduates at the college tying themselves to bedposts and all that sort of thing. I think it's highly sexual, the handcuff.
One final question. You've given a lot of audiences shocks sitting in the stalls. You've frightened me to death with Psycho. What frightens you?
Policemen.
Why?
I don't know. I'm scared of policemen. That's why I won't drive a car. If I don't drive a car, I can't get a ticket. Can't bear the suspense of waiting for the result of a ticket or a summons. I'm really quite distressed about it.
But you're very serious.
Yeah, I'm really absolutely serious about that, yes. I'm a very shy, mild, inoffensive individual